There are many examples of my field, the field of psychotherapy, being full of shit. And one of those examples is a model of dealing with grief that was developed by a Swiss psychologist or a psychiatrist, don't remember, by the name of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who had the 5 stages of grief. And the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the problem with that is, first of all, grief, it's not processed in a uniform manner. And these theories were never developed to be things that you would understand in a uniform manner. In fact, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who did a lot of research to develop this model, when she went through a loss, I believe it was of her husband, but she went through a close loss, and she later wrote, "This was all off. I'm not dealing with any of these things in any of these ways." And I think our field has to do a better job of highlighting like when something is theoretical based versus like when something is based in the real world, because the woman herself went through a grief in her personal life and then later said it was all wrong and none of this is congruent to the way that I experienced my grief. And to kind of make this point, today I'm going to talk about the grief that I went through, the most significant grief that I went through, and I'm going to share that story and just really help you to understand that how you deal with grief is an individualized personal journey. Forget all the research, forget all that kind of stuff. You get to go on that personal journey on the way that is most right for you. So welcome back to the aha moments, where every day I share the lessons I've learned in my work as a psychotherapist and in my life to inspire you to live your very best life. Of course, I'm your host, Elliott Connie. Without question, the biggest loss I've ever had personally was the loss of my Uncle Jeffrey. You guys have heard me talk about the loss of my Uncle Jeffrey loads and loads of times. And it's significant to me. And anytime I talk about a topic related to grief and loss, or anytime I talk about something super important to me or that, I think about the death of my uncle. Now, that happened at a very odd time. And to tell you the full story, which I'm actually not sure I've ever shared here, but the full story is I had another uncle, Jeffrey's brother, an uncle named Maine. We called him Maine. I actually I don't know how to spell it. We just called him Maine. And he had developed dementia and was put into a hospital. And somehow he walked out of the hospital. Somehow he escaped the hospital. And for days in Chicago, no one knew where my Uncle Maine was. And on this one particular day, I was in Toronto. I had just finished teaching an event in Toronto. And I am about to fly to Denmark. And my mother messaged me saying that they found my Uncle Maine's body somewhere in Chicago, which was incredibly sad. And I was devastated. I was dealing with that grief. My Uncle Maine is just like everybody else. He's a very important member of the family, and now he was gone. And I had to process that in Toronto, and I got on a plane and I flew to Denmark. A woman named Anne Marie, who was hosting the event I was doing, picked me up at the airport, drove me to her home. And as I was at her home, I remember it was late at night. It was like midnight in Denmark, which meant it was like 6 p.m. in the U.S. And I'm just getting ready to go to bed. I see a post from my cousin, and she posted a frown face on social media, on Facebook. And someone commented, like, "Why are you sad?" And she said, "My last uncle just passed." And I thought, well, that's not true. Maine passed away, but Uncle Jeffrey is still alive. I just thought my cousin just referenced the wrong uncle, and I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, and I thought, what if she wasn't wrong? Like, did something happen to Jeffrey? And I called my aunt, Jeffrey's sister, and just said, "Hey, I just saw a post on social media. Is Jeffrey okay?" And my aunt let me know that no, he had passed away from a heart attack the day before, and they didn't want to tell me because I was out of the country, and everybody knew Jeffrey and I were very, very close. It was a rough day, man. Like, I'm just processing this loss. I got to go teach on this day, and I remember thinking, I don't want to do this, and I called my buddy Chris. Chris is like a big brother to me. I love him, and he's older than me and he's been much more experienced in this field. So I called Chris, and I was like, "Hey, man, how do I get out of this?" And I thought he was going to give me like some great advice, like just tell him you're sick or whatever he was going to say. And he's like, "Man, you have to," I'll never forget, the exact phrase he says is, "Oh dear." He said, "You have to shine brighter than you've ever shined before in honor of your uncle." And I cried, and he listened to me, and I did go on and teach those 2 days. And it was a hard experience. Like that, losing my uncle Jeffrey was really tough. But I didn't experience any denial, anger, bargaining, depression, or acceptance. I was just sad. I didn't know what to do. And to be honest with you, I still don't. I still don't know how to exactly process that. I believe that was in 2018. I still don't know how to process that loss. But to think that you go through like some sort of 5 stages, I mean, it's crazy. I was just sad. My Uncle Jeffrey was gone. He was never going to come back, and I was just sad. To this day, I think about him all the time. I got a tattoo in honor of my Uncle Jeffrey. Let me see. I'll show y'all the tattoo. He used to say this all the time. He used to say, "Why not?" So I got the words "Why not" tattooed on my arm. Jeffrey believed nothing was impossible, so he would often say crazy stuff like, "I'm going to build a house with my bare hands." I'm like, "Jeffrey, you can't build a house with your bare hands." And he'd say, "Why not?" And whenever I do something cool, like I'm in the entertainment world doing comedy and, taking my business to whole new levels in the therapy world. And I just think how Jeffrey would be so proud. I went to Disneyland last year, and I just thought Jeffrey would have loved this. Like, I think about Jeffrey's phone number is still in my phone. Like, that's how I deal with my grief. Anyway, I say all this to say, sometimes the psychotherapy field is just full of shit. They have these theories and ideas, and they use them as principles, and the therapists in the community like talk to their clients as if you're going through these 5 stages of grief, and you go through stage 1 through 5. Sometimes you're just sad, and you get to have an individual experience on how you deal with loss. That's the message today. Thanks for being here. If you wouldn't mind doing me a super huge favor, I would love it if you would share this podcast with at least one person in your life that you think could benefit from hearing this message today. And also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen to your podcast. And also follow me on all of the social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can search for my name, Elliott Connie, or @Elliott Speaks. That's my handle across all platforms. Can't wait to see you tomorrow.